In this video I'll tell you about a label that can add text to objects in our plans and sections and elevations. As you know, we currently use a combination of plain text and text actually embedded in the objects to document our plans. The problem with this is the plain text, we have to physically type whatever it is we want it to say, so it's quite easy to make a mistake. And with object text, the object text is great in one way in that it can be moved and rotated around the object, and it can also be positioned at different places for different scales. So effectively we can have it in two different places on our electrical plans or our floor plans. But the problem is the text only says one thing, and it's either on or off. So if I turn it off on the floor plan, it will be off on the electrical plan, and it will also say the same thing. With the label tool, we can get around that in that you can have multiple labels connected to any one element. So in effect it gives us a combination of standard text and object text, in that we can have the text that we want in any layer, because we can put as many labels as we like in each layer. So we can effectively have one label on the floor plan, another label in a different position on the electrical plan, another label in a different position on the site plan. They can all be justified and formatted differently, so we can have different size text if we want to. On one we can have text with an arrow or text with a box. On a different plan we can have the same text with no arrows and no boxes. So it gives us flexibility in what we see across all of our plans. So this is all done with object text and standard text. If I look at this here, this is done with the label tool. It can be done exactly the same, so we can still have labels with arrows, that's fine. We can have labels without arrows. We can have them justified on the left or the right. We can have them positioned where we want. We can rotate them. So they can effectively look exactly the same as the object text and the standard text that we do. The difference is this is a label object and it reads the information from the actual objects themselves. So this label for the bank of drawers, if I go to pre-select that label, you can see that the bank of drawers highlights. It means that that label is associated to those drawers or to that object, and it's reading the information from that object. If I go to highlight this one, you'll find that the other bank of drawers will highlight. If I highlight the one for the shower, you can see that the shower object is highlighting, which just means that this label is attached to that object. There is another video that you can see about labels that will explain how the labels can be attached, and will also explain the pet palette and what all the different options are for moving and adjusting the labels. So I won't go into that detail again here. As I say, this is all one label. It is exactly the same label placed multiple times for each object. It is linked to each object and it gets the information from each object. So if I look over here at some objects where I've turned the text off, and if you want to do this, that's all you have to do, is to select the objects and turn the text off. All I have to do now is go and find that label. Now there's your label tool, and again there's a video that explains all the different settings and things, so I won't go into all of that. But what's important is that we choose the label that's called Object Text Label JWH. This is just the version number so that I know that it was written in version 22. But at the moment we're just interested in the Object Text Label JWH. So we select that. We can say what layer we want to put it in. We can go through and change all the settings for the text justification and size, and whether it has a box and arrows and things like that. But what you can do is I've also set up some favourites. So in the favourites you'll find there's a whole bunch of favourites here called object text. If you don't have the object text favourites here, you can always go into the favourite settings and import them from the latest template. There's a separate video that shows you how to do this, so I won't go into further details here. There's some for the electrical plan, some for the presentation plan, some for site plans, and some for working drawings. They do slightly different things in that just the plain one that doesn't say anything is just the regular label with an arrow. This one here is saying that it has no pointer or no arrow and happens to be parallel to the object that we're placing. That's important for things like doors where we're putting, or openings where we're putting the text on here. If the opening was in a vertical wall, we can have the text run parallel to that opening. So you have the choice of the settings in here. You can actually go into here. Again, the video about the labels will explain this. We can have all the different types of settings, so we can go parallel or perpendicular to an object if we want to as well. And there's also one here with a frame, so if you want to put a box around the text automatically, you can do that. That just saves you changing all the settings over in the info box. So what I'm interested in here is I'm interested in the working drawings. I'll explain the different types of drawings in just a moment, but I'm just interested in a label for these objects that will go into my working drawings. So I just double click that favourite. That sets everything up for me that I need to do. All I need to do now is to choose my object and associate a label to it. So it's important, the favourites actually won't set this, but it's important that with the geometry we make sure that we've got the associated mode turned on, and that we use this one here, which is what they call detailed, rather than the simple method, which is this. The simple method will place the label with one click, but you don't have a choice of where that arrow goes or where the text is positioned. With the detailed method, you actually click the label onto the object and you can then define where the label goes. So we'll go for the detailed method. All I need to do now is to come here and highlight my object. All the objects have been scripted so that they will highlight whether you choose the edge of the object or the lines inside the object, or if you use your magnet, the spacebar, you can actually select the fill in the object as well. So all I need to do is to just come here and see that the object is selecting or highlighting. I can now click, that's associated the label to that object. I now click twice more to say where I want the leader line to be and where I want the text to be. And you can see it's gotten the information straight away from that object. If I do the same thing on this object here, and if I don't want the arrow to be a double line like that, all I have to do is come across, possibly horizontally or whichever direction I want, click once and then click twice exactly on the same spot, and you'll just get the single line. It can be edited afterwards, that's fine. But you can see here that what's happened is it's read the information from the object. It knows this is a plain bank of drawers. It knows this one's been changed to 2 drawers with a microwave. So it's reading the information from the object. And I'll explain that in just a little while. If I do the same here for my shower, I can click and associate to my shower and then place the label, and you can see it's placed that. So in this particular case, this might be the type of note where you want the box. So I can come down here and say, look, I want the working drawing pointer with a frame, double click that. If I place exactly the same label again now and place it here, you can see that what it's done is it's put a box around it. Now these are all adjustable, so all I have to do is to select that text, grab text, and I can now shrink this. So you can see here it's 1 line, that's 2 lines, that's jumped to 3 lines. So I can quite easily adjust my label to suit the space that I've got on the screen. Things like the door here, I don't necessarily want the pointer, I want just plain text, so that's where I can use the one that here says no pointer and parallel. So all I do is to double click the favourite. Again, I need to just be careful that I highlight the door and not the wall. So I need to get a point on that door or that opening that I can see the door opening highlighting, not the wall highlighting, because I need to associate the label to that door opening. And then I just click. Because I've not got the arrow, I don't have to nominate a position for it. So once it's placed, what I can then do is to select that. I can now just simply move this. It doesn't matter where I move it to, it's still associated to that opening. I can adjust the text, so I can say, no, look, I want it onto 2 lines, and I can just reposition that to wherever I want. It's always associated to that door, so as I go to highlight that label, you can see the door opening is also highlighting. Again, it's just reading the information from the object. So I can carry on back to my label tool. In this case, I want the standard working drawing with the arrow again. There's my shelf and rail, so all I've got to do is make sure that my shelf and rail is highlighted, click and place my label. It reads the information from there. There's my sliding doors, click, and just do one bit of the single line, click and place the label. Placing the labels here for the gas bottles, I can just come out to the side. It doesn't matter which way, whether I go right or left, it will just go in the direction that you say. All I need to do now is to select that and grab the text and shrink it in. Because I've gone to the left hand side here, although I'm shrinking the text this way, you see it actually sliding in the opposite direction. That's just the quirk of the labels, because the text will always adjust from the right hand side. But if I adjust that to say, look, okay, I'm happy with the 2 lines there, so I'll adjust to 2 lines of text. As soon as I click and say OK, you can see the text moves back to where it should be attached to the leader line. So I can adjust that, and I can also adjust the justification or the text alignment. So I can say, look, I want right justified text. Depending on how many lines of text you've got and how it's positioned, how it's justified, you may end up with a gap between the leader and the text. The text always pretends as if it's got a box around it, and the line will always come from the edge of that box. So in this case, there's a bit of a gap. So if I go left justified, it makes it even worse. Center justified is not so bad, but I might want right justified. All of these labels, all the text is all completely adjustable. So you can just go willy-nilly. And the idea is now that you just literally just go around and label everything on your plan. And that's great for the working drawings. If I wanted to do the same thing for the presentation, I'd just go in here and I'd say, okay, let's go and get the presentation label. Select this. Obviously it's going into a different layer, which that layer is turned off at the moment. So I can do one of 2 things. I can turn that layer on, or I can just click, and if I do this shelf and rail here, for example, I can just click and it will say, do you want to show this layer? So I say show the layer, and I can place the label. And you can see here, in this case here, which I've obviously got to double up because I've got one in the presentation layer that I didn't delete. In the working drawing, you can see it's now saying 450 shelf and rail at 1650 above floor level. On my presentation, it's not giving me quite as much detail. It's just saying a 450 shelf and rail. So we can actually have on our plan, so if I say working drawing floor plan, obviously it's now going to turn the presentation layers off, shows me the working drawing text, and that label can say something completely different. If I now switch to the presentation plan, all the working drawing text turns off and my presentation label turns on, and it shows me something different. Again, all this information is coming from the actual object itself, the actual shelf object, which I'll show you in just a few moments. But that's the idea now, is that we can have labels for presentation plans or sales sketches. We can do some for the working drawing, we can do labels for the electrical plan, we can do labels for the site plan. And each of those labels can potentially say something different. They can say exactly the same thing as well, but it's all about how we set up the actual objects. So that's really all that we need to do, and we just go around and label all the objects. Now, not all objects have got this ability. Many objects that never had text before, like bank of drawers and the shower and the shelf and rail and the doors, those sort of objects that traditionally don't have object text built into the object, they can be labelled as well. In just a little while I'll show you a list of all the objects that can be labelled. But the essence is now that we just quickly go around and click and place labels on all our objects, and then amend the position of the labels to suit how we want to set the documentation out. The only difference between these favourites, if I select a label and go into the settings, the only difference is that we're just saying whether we want to say, is it a presentation label, a working drawing, electrical, or a site label. Not every object has the text for each of these. They will generally all have presentation and working drawing text. Sometimes they're different, sometimes they're the same, it just depends on the object. But we've got complete control over that in the object itself. Some will have electrical text and some will have site text. Now it makes no sense for the shelf and rail. We would not nominate or document that on the electrical plan or on the site plan, so you'll find that this object, the shelf and rail object, won't have electrical text and it won't have site text. It will only have these two. So if I choose, if I just let go of that one, if I choose this label that's associated to the shelf and rail, if I come into here and I say no, but show me the electrical text, what you'll find is the preview will change. If I say OK, the actual label itself will change, and it will tell me that the object label is not associated to an object, or the correct sub-element, or the label text value has not been set. If it's not associated, it just means that we did not click on the shelf or the object properly, and we didn't associate it to the object. So if I was to simply place a label not associated to anything and just show that layer, I can place a label over here and you can see that's exactly what it says, that it's not associated. So it's quite easy to pick up if you've made a mistake, because the label will try and tell you that something is wrong. In this case, I know that it's associated because as I select that label, the shelf object is highlighting, so I know it's associated. All I need to do in here is know that the label text value has not been set. So the electrical text value has not been set for this object because it doesn't need electrical text. So I just need to choose whether I want the presentation text or the working drawing text. There is a little bit more to the label setting. There are a couple of other options in here that we don't need to worry about just yet. I'll get to that. Label sub-elements. It's things like objects that contain other objects, like the vanity basin that contains basins and drawers and shelves and mirrors and taps and things like that. By labelling sub-elements, we can actually get information about the mirror or the shelves or the drawers or whatever those sub-elements are. So as I say, the label reads the information from the object. If I was to look at the object, when I go into the object settings, what you'll find in the parameter list, you'll now see a setting here for label text. So it will still have, in the case of objects like meter boxes and hot water systems and stuff, it will still have the regular text settings in here, but there'll also be this label text. So generally with the regular text, you just turn the regular text off, which I'll show you. I'll grab a meter box. So here's my object text. I can turn my object text on, or I can turn my object text off. Obviously, if I'm using the labels, I want to turn the object text off. But then I have this label text. Now the label text, there'll be a section for presentation label. There'll be a section for working drawing label. If there's site plans and electrical plans, there'll be sections for site plans and electrical plan labels as well. This is where it gets all the information from, and this is where you can actually type in exactly what you want to type in. Now you can do this in the parameter list. I actually find it easier if you go into the graphical interface as such. If you go into the graphical interface and choose which one it is. So not the parameter list, but actually go to, say, the working drawings label, because that's what I'm interested in. So in my working drawing label, you can see here that I've got the label settings all in here. Now it's done in 3 parts. There's what we call a prefix, the actual label, the main label itself, and a suffix. The prefix and the suffix just allow you to have additional information. In this particular case with the meter box, there's really nothing much more you want to say about the meter box. You don't want to give a size or some other information before the main meter box note. Like with shelves, you would have the number of shelves. So there's no choices in here, but at any time I can say custom prefix, and I can type in exactly what I want to type in there, and that's exactly what we'll say in the note. Now you can't see the label in the object preview because it's a separate label. It's not part of the object, so you won't see it in the object preview. But what I've done down the bottom here is to say that the working drawing label will read as, and you can see type custom prefix here. If I change that and just type something else, if I type whatever I type in here, as soon as I click and basically confirm that that's there, so this is what the label is going to read, something gas electric meter box. So in this particular case, no, I don't want custom text, so I'm just going to go back to none. So I don't want any prefix, and you can see what my label will now read. Gas electric meter box. I've got no choice in this particular case. I can't choose anything. Gas electric meter box is what it says. It actually gets the information from the settings in the parameters. So if I come back into here and instead of a gas electric meter box, I change it to an electric meter box. Now when I go back to my working drawing label, you can see it's actually changed. And I only have one choice, is the electric meter box. That's deliberate on my part. I've tried to automate the objects so that as you amend the object, the labels will automatically update for the majority of times. Not every time, but for most times, the label will say what settings you've created in the object. So again, if I go into my object parameters and I set it just as a pure gas meter box, and I go back to my label settings, you can now see it's saying gas meter box, and the label will say that it's just a gas meter box, and I have no choice, it's gas meter box. But again, at any time you can allow for custom text, so I can say no, allow for custom text. Now you can type whatever you like in there, and that's exactly what's going to read in the label. So again, I'm not interested in custom text in this particular case. I just want to go back to my parameters, and we'll just set it back to a standard combination meter box. And any of these other settings might also affect it. So if I start putting things like a lockable electric box or a lockable gas box or 3-phase, so if I nominate that it's 3-phase, for example, with a lockable electric box, let's have a look at the label text now. So now it's saying a lockable electric gas meter box with 3-phase. So that note, again, I've only got the one note, so it's getting the information directly from the parameters of the object. But again, I can override that whenever I want. And the suffix, there's nothing I want to say after this, but I could technically, if I wanted to, I could have left that as an electric meter box, and I could actually put a suffix in here and say 3-phase. So I could actually add my own notes to the end of it. Now the thing is, with custom text, if you type custom text, then you adjust the object, the custom text will not change. It says what it says. So it is custom text. So with this, it's automatic and it's getting the text from the object settings itself. When you type custom text, it will remain as custom text and won't alter. You'll also find when you do custom text, so if I was to type something custom in here, I'll just leave that on if you like. When I go to my note, you'll see that it will go blue, and it will go blue. So if it's not associated, it goes purple, but if it goes blue, you know that that is not standard information. It's got some sort of custom text in it. we know straight away that that label is not going to change because in my working drawing I've told it to use custom text. If I turn that custom text back off and I say OK, you can see that the label now is saying exactly what it was. And yes, that meter box, if we look at it in 3D, is a lockable meter box. So it's getting all the information from the object settings itself. Now, that's fine. So that's the working drawing part of it. So again, if I come back into here, there's my work drawings we're interested in. If I want the presentation, I can set the presentation up as well. Now in this particular case with the meter box, if you were going to note it on the presentation plan, you would probably have it with exactly the same note, but you could choose, in some cases there'll be a drop-down list of notes here. In this case, it's just the one that's included. Actually, I'll show you with the shelf and rail, that might explain it a little bit better. So if I take the shelf and rail and I come into here, again, I've got the label text here, but I prefer to actually go into the graphical interface. There's my working drawing text. So my working drawing text has got the prefix with auto number and depth. Because it's just the one shelf at the moment, it's not going to say one shelf. It will just leave it as it is, but it's got the depth of 450 shelf and rail. So shelf and rail is my standard note, and I've got no choice as to what that says unless I go to custom text. And afterwards, for the suffix, I've got the auto height above floor level or the centers. So what that means is, because it's just a single shelf, it will give me the height above the floor level. If it was multiple shelves, it would actually give me the centers of each shelf, so 400 centers or whatever it's set at. Again, it gets all this information from the shelf itself, the object settings. So if I go into the parameters and I come into here and I say, look, turn the rod off and give me multiple shelves. When I go back to my working drawing, you can see that it's now saying, because it's auto number and depth, it's now giving me 4 by 450 shelves at 400 centers. So I've tried to make it so that these notes will adjust themselves automatically, probably 95% of the times. But you do have the choice of changing the settings. So if you don't want the auto number and depth, you can choose to say, no, I just want the number only, or just the depth only, or anything custom that you want to type, or none. So you can just say shelves at 400 centers. That's exactly the note that you'll get on the label. It's quite customizable as to what you say, and the same to prefix. You'll have choices as to what you can say, and sometimes you'll have choices here. In this case, it knows that it's a single shelf or multiple shelves, so that's exactly what it will say. So there's my working drawing, and now if I go and have a look at the presentation drawing label, it can say something completely different. I can have the auto number and depth, or I can have nothing, or I can have just a depth only. I can choose what I want to say. So in this case, I'm going to say none just for the sake of it. So shelves with no suffix either. Again, I can have the height or the centers if I want to. So this is just simply on the presentation sketch, it's simply going to say shelves. There's no options here for electrical text or site text because this object won't be shown on those particular plans. So if I say OK now, then the labels that I've already placed, the labels are straight away updated because they're reading the information from that object. So my working drawing label has changed to 450 shelves at 400 centers. My presentation label has now just set to shelves. So again, if I change to the floor plan, that's a working drawing, and if I change to my presentation plan, that's my presentation plan. So I can have labels in whichever position I like. I can move them around, rotate them how I like, with leaders, without leaders, and each one can have its own little bit of text. So quite flexible in what you can and can't do. As I say, the objects are set so that 95% of the time the label is correct. All you have to do is come around and place labels, whether you want the working drawing label or the presentation label or whatever it is you want. Each object might be a little bit different in the way that it's set out. They'll all have obviously different options. So again, the working drawing here, I've got no choice. It's only the slab step down. And some objects are clever enough that this knows that I only have a slab step down when I don't have a shower hob. So if I go into the settings and say tile and hob settings, and I turn my hob on, so now I've got a hob around the shower. When I go back to my working drawing label, there's nothing there, because it knows that there should be no note for the step down. So if I was to now go to that shower and say OK, you can see what happens is the labels that are associated to it will now say that the object is either not associated, which I know it is associated, that's fine, so it's not that. It's got the correct sub-element isn't set, or the label text value has not been set. So in this case, that's exactly what it is. The label text value has not been set. So if I come into here and go to my working drawing labels, there's nothing set. So there's no point. You don't show the label. You just delete the label. You don't need to show it. So it's just a warning to say that there's no need for that particular label. But again, if I go back into my hob settings and I'll turn my hobs off, as soon as I say OK, those labels will actually update. And it says, oh, hang on, now I've got a recessed floor, and I'll note that. If you don't want to note it, then fine, don't put the label on. That's given. You just don't need to show anything. Now, it's not clever enough to know that there's a 50mm recess, because there's nowhere in the actual shower object itself that you actually set the 50mm recess. I guess eventually I could build that in and get that information from the shower as well. You can do it for other objects as well, things like downpipes. You can see here I've got a downpipe. That downpipe, if I pull the labels away, the downpipe has its own text in there. When it comes to labelling downpipes, if I delete those labels off, I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I can find a node, there's a node there. So if I alt click and select that label, I'm just alt clicking that because it sets it up. I know it's a downpipe, so if you've got an existing label for downpipes and you want to label downpipes, you can just alt click one and you know that it's getting all the correct information for that label. But what's important too is it's also setting up things like the width of the label. It's not actually the marker size that it uses. If you're doing an auto text label, the width of the label is that. This is controlled through the object script. Basically what will have happened is it's turned the arrow pointer off and set the width. Now what's important with this is probably the alignment. So I want to align it horizontal, but there's also a setting that you actually can't see here. You need to go into the actual settings for, and what you can do is you can use this anchor point. I've got the bottom center anchor point, so if I click there, you'll see that the text goes up. If I was to click down here on the downpipe, you can see it's doing the same thing. It's going up, so it's the bottom anchor point. So if I wanted the text there, that's exactly what I'd do. If I want the text to the right hand side, I'd probably choose that as my anchor point. And then I'd click somewhere on the right hand side and it puts the downpipe there. If I want the text on the left hand side, I'd click that as my anchor point. And I'd click on this side of the downpipe and it puts the text over here. So yes, you can place the labels and you can just simply move them afterwards, or if you want to get a little bit fussy, you can actually go into play around with the anchor points. And that applies also to the openings. I could apply the text here. Let me alt click that one just to get all of its properties. If I now select that and delete it, if I go into the anchor point here and say that's my anchor point at the bottom, and I click on the door, I've just got to make sure that I get the door. It's going to be a little bit fuzzy. So I can click there and you can see it's gone there. If I was to do the anchor point on the top, I could do that and I could anchor to there. So you can get the label in the position that you want if you want to, or as I say, just put it down. It's associated. You can just then move it to where you want it to move. It's possible to label all your objects in sections and elevations as well, just as you can on the floor plan. If I open this section up, all that we have to do is choose our label, make sure everything is set up properly, and again, to do this, just use your favourites, because that does exactly what you want. Do you want the working drawing text or the presentation text? You probably won't have site and electrical text for objects in elevation, because you won't do elevations for those type of drawings. But all you have to do is choose your favourite, in this case the working drawings, select the element that you want to label and simply place the label. It's as easy as that. So we can now go around and label everything, including all of the internal things like the sliding doors and openings, banks of drawers. Any of the objects that have this ability to be labelled can be labelled in sections and elevations as well. At the moment, these are all the objects that have the ability to be labelled. So you can recognise them easily, what I've done is in the object preview, I've added a small blue L either to the bottom right or the top right hand corner of the object. So you can quite easily see that the barge and capping can be labelled, the box gutter can be labelled, the downpipe can be labelled, the gable complete can be labelled, and it's the same for all other objects that have this ability to be labelled.